Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Okay, today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Lori Arnold with me, and I'm just going to do a quick announcement because I haven't gotten a chance to update our intros and outro. And when I was in the shower this morning, I was like, "It's outro word," but I've decided it is. So we're going to embrace it. But just to let you know, if you haven't heard, we have launched the Kepperling Preservation Hub. It's an online resource center with videos and resources and PDF books and training videos. Also, the podcast transcripts are there. And then there's also the option to have consultations and virtual coffee breaks where you can come on twice a month and get your questions and your questions answered. So thank you, Lori, for joining me today.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell me about your background.
Well, I started out in the art world. As an undergrad, I was an art person and I did wood sculpture. And I graduated with a degree in art history, and I went to work at MoMA.
Okay.
And I was a curatorial assistant there. And I worked very close with the conservators because my job was to assess the condition of the collection for painting and sculpture.
Right. Yeah.
So I had a conversation one day with the sculpture conservator, and she asked me what I really wanted to do. And I described to her, if you were looking at a building and a piece fell off and you wanted to put it back the way it was, and she looked at me with this twinkle in her eye and said, "I have someone you need to meet." And she set up coffee with one of the professors at Columbia's preservation program.
Okay.
And I was hooked.
That's great.
That year I applied, and the following year I started.
Okay.
And it was everything I hoped it would be. It was fascinating. And I focused on wood, but I was in New York, so I learned a great deal of masonry work as well.
Right. Yeah. Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say we have because when we're looking for employees, and it's hard to find necessarily people with experience that aren't working for themselves. We find that our best employees do come from the art world. So I'm not surprised that you have an art background.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just kind of hung in there. I finished in 99, and I started working on the PhD in 2001, and I finished that in 2005, and I'm still at it.
Yeah. So preservation wasn't your first kind of like your first choice, but it was like as soon as you start working in the conservation, that kind of led you into preservation. So that's I think that happens a lot because people aren't aware that preservation is kind of a thing that you can have as a career.
Correct. Yeah. And it satisfied the creative side of me.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. So was there something specific about preservation that pulled you in?
the history.
The history of it, yeah.
Um, yeah, I had always loved art history,
Mhm,
and having something that illuminated or described a time period like a painting or
mhm,
a building, um, it just made sense to me. Like I loved that connection with the past
yeah,
through myself. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's very important. And I agree with you. So tell me about the types of work that you've done within preservation.
Oh, goodness. I've done, as I said, working in New York,
Mhm.
tons of masonry. But I've had my own business since 2004.
Okay.
And the wood projects I've done have been epic. I was the conservator for the slave cabins at Andrew Jackson's First Hermitage in
Okay.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
And because I was the conservator, we got to do it the exact way I wanted to do it. Like
Oh, yes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I disassembled the log cabins and recorded everything and conserved each log, and then we rebuilt it all. It was fantastic. It was the only project that I felt like I had broken up with my boyfriend when it was over with.
Oh, yeah. You had been so involved. Yes.
Yeah, and it was sad with the day I woke up and I was done. Um, but I'm still the conservator for the Jackson, uh, for the Pollock Krasner studio, out in the Hamptons.
Okay.
Jackson Pollock studio floor is, uh, like a record of his paintings. You know, he laid all the canvases on the floor
Hmm.
and did his spatter paintings on the floor,
Yeah.
and all that paint is still there. Uh, his footprints are in the paint and
Right.
his cigarette butts and everything. So I conserve that floor. It's one of
Yes.
the few hands-on things I do. Yeah.
How and I'm just like thinking about cigarette butts. So like do you like not allow foot traffic through there then? Is that how you kind of preserve that area?
No,
Okay.
oddly, the director wanted the educational aspect of being able to walk on the floor and
Okay.
experience it and touch it.
Hmm.
And so we did way back, we did a whole bunch of research on booties that you could
Okay.
put
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And we found some really good ones, and she still uses them to this day. So,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because I was thinking you don't want all of that traffic then to wear it down because that is what you're trying to preserve. So yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. I
yeah.
never thought about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my concern even was the booties polishing it where you could
Oh
walk.
yeah. Yeah.
And but because of the type of material they're made out of, they don't polish. So I was like, awesome. That's great.
Yeah, that is
So
very, yeah, that's very interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's I think that those are very interesting projects too, to kind of highlight the type of work that you've done. For someone who, is listening and maybe isn't familiar with like, they're familiar with people who restore things, but they're maybe not familiar with the idea of conservation. Can you kind of talk to me about what wood or masonry conservation is?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's mostly about maintaining the historic integrity of the material itself. If you have a rotten log, you need to take the rot out of it and put a piece of wood in there. Same species, same grain direction,
Hmm.
so that the material can continue to behave the way it's always behaved,
Right.
and yet still have its historic integrity.
Hmm.
So that's pretty much the difference. A conservator understands how materials behave next to each other,
Yeah.
and how they behave in a building. If you put old material next to new,
Hmm.
uh, what the result will be.
Yeah, yeah. And those are very important things to understand. I was um one of the hats that I wear is I am the executive director for the the Historic Preservation Trust of Lancaster County part-time.
Mhm.
I don't say part-time first because I feel like that makes it, but it's one of the things that I do. And I had to go out a couple weeks ago and look at a project that people were wanting to use substitute materials on. And they were like, well, and I said, well, you have to understand that, like, if you put like some, plastic, I will just say plastic because that's what it was. If you put some plastic trim on this, it's not going to behave the same way as the wood. You don't have enough locking. Like, I was trying to lay out everything that they were going to have to understand, but that is so important to understand, or you're going to have failure.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So I saw, and I was very interested that your PhD was in epoxies and historic wood. So I thought that was very interesting. So can you tell me a little bit about it? Because I know there's so many epoxies on the market now.
There is.
Yeah.
I was discouraged from getting a PhD. I was accepted into Winterthur when my daughter was born, and I thought, "Ooh, I'll get another one." But part of one, Columbia offered it to me for free.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, who's not going to take that?
Right. Yeah.
My main reason, and this was a while ago when I was
Mhm.
younger,
Yeah.
but my main reason was when I started presenting at conferences, my research that I did in my master's on epoxies
Mhm.
and the weathering that I had done on them. Um, I had a lot of male carpenters stand
Yeah.
up in the audience and say, well, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've never had an epoxy fail. And my answer would be, well, have you gone back to look?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They just didn't call
And
you back.
exactly. And I got so tired of hearing that. I thought, you know what? I'm just going to get an advanced degree in this and make myself the expert, and I don't have to have this conversation anymore.
Right.
Because I knew why they failed, and I know why, people use them. Um, but there was so many out there that behave differently and have different
Right.
application methods, um, that what it distilled down to is there is one epoxy out there that you can put in exterior wood and it doesn't fail. There's one.
Yeah.
And I support that. It's Durafix.
Okay.
And I support his work. I support his marketing. I'm not going to write a paper for him, but
Yeah.
it,
So can you kind of explain what
why?
makes that, yeah, the why, what makes it different?
I think that it has to do with it has no filler in
Okay.
it. I think the filler inhibits the epoxy's ability to bond to the wood.
Okay.
I think where the epoxy meets the wood, um, and a lot of those epoxies that have fillers, there's a microenvironment created on application because the epoxy is hot.
Mhm.
So you have this microenvironment that has moisture in it and whatever else that the warm temperature is pulling out of the wood. And I think that interferes with the bond.
Yeah.
And, be it cellulose, which is for boats, but we use it everywhere else,
Uh-huh.
or microballoons, also for boats. The company that I'm at right now, I'm working on getting rid of Abitron
Oh yeah.
because
We've
because
had, I think that their formula has changed too, but we've had issues with it, in the past 10 years. Yeah.
I can make it fail in under a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can change the formula all they want. It doesn't, Durafix doesn't get hot
Hmm.
when you mix it, and
Yeah.
all the
So
others
you're not
do.
having that chemical reaction. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, Durafix has two components. but it cures very slowly.
Mhm.
And I believe that it allows the epoxy molecule to get inside the wood cell.
Mhm.
And I'm in 25 years, I can't make it fail. I've tried everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and
That,
that's what we should be using.
yeah, that makes sense to me. I what was I thinking about? Yeah, that, I mean, the understanding the chemistry and the way that it, interacts, those things are important to understand. And we've seen people use, things for cars on, wood, and that doesn't, yeah. So like
Yes.
all of those things, you see bad repairs if you hang out hang out with old buildings long enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Things that, like I can see a failed epoxy patch under paint.
Oh
Like I
yeah.
know
Yeah,
what the
you can.
paint looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that used to be like my hardcore mission.
Hmm.
Um, but it's something that I feel like I've completed the research on and I
Yeah.
know now.
And you
Yeah.
can, yeah, and you can share that knowledge with people, and you can, that they can, go off and use that information. Yeah. Yeah. But it's hard because, these, like talking about the company that you're with now, and rewrite getting Abatron out of the specs, like when the specs are written, it's really hard to get any wiggle room with that. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's where the change needs to be made with the people who are making the specifications.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
So
if you have a stubborn architect, you use $3 words and it usually works.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good. Well, was there anything else? I'm going to get into kind of more general. Was there anything else that you wanted to share about epoxies or conservation or anything like that?
No,
Okay,
no,
okay, very
that's
good.
good.
Yeah. So tell me from your perspective, and you're still doing some conservation work, but then you're also doing project management. Is that correct? Yeah.
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 Yep.
So tell me a little bit from your perspective about trends and challenges that you see in preservation.
Oh, so many. Um, I I spend a lot of my time here in Philadelphia doing advocacy.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I find that the one planning law class that I was required to take
Mhm.
has really served me well.
Yeah.
Um, there's so much gentrification going on,
There is.
and this push for higher density.
Mhm.
Um, my focus in preservation has really turned to helping established poor people stay in their homes
Yeah.
while gentrification is going on around them.
Yeah.
Uh, I helped one neighborhood here in the city, Point Breeze. I went around and handed out my card and said, listen, I can show you how to appeal your property taxes. Let me just show you.
Right.
And, you have families that have lived in these neighborhoods for decades.
Right.
And
The house has been given generation to generation. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they need to stay.
Yeah.
Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods, and we can't just turn them all into new construction rental neighborhoods.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I've been really passionate about that because I find that the development is really our biggest challenge right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with you. We're seeing a lot of development in Lancaster also, not just like what was going on 30 years ago, like the suburban developments. It's infill in the city. It's strings of small farms that they can put a very big development in, that's that density, that mixed use, where it's apartments and townhouses, and so it's very dense. And also now, and I think some of it's just because of what's going on everywhere with housing costs. We have people moving in from New York and Philadelphia because they think it's so much less expensive here, which comparatively it is. But
Yeah.
yeah, but that is there's pressure everywhere, and I think that is a huge problem for preservation.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think that that's good. Yeah, I think that I would be interested in a planning law class, because I feel like sometimes that's like where the gaps of my knowledge are.
Yeah, yeah. I went at one point and pulled all my books out and everything and, freshened on it
Yeah,
because I have to stand in front of city council and make an argument for why you can't do this. This isn't okay.
right. Yeah.
Um, and it's been a struggle and it's been a source of burnout for me.
Oh, I'm sure, because
Um,
it's a never ending battle. It's
of
and
loss.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It is hard, and and there's so many different pressures going on. So yeah, it's hard. So
yeah,
you have to take breaks, but you have to, the advocacy is never ending.
exactly.
Yeah.
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 But I am fascinated by this trend that I hear from, you know, young preservationists.
Hmm.
There's a lot that talk about this idea of undoing preservation
Hmm.
and reassembling it in a different way. I'm fascinated by their conversations
Yeah.
and the angle they're taking because hey,
Yeah.
I'm open to new ideas
Right.
with
That's
other
really
things.
interesting to me. So this morning I just read an article, and it was like I think it was a Gen X parent showing Dead Poet Society to their children. They're
Oh,
like teenage children,
uh-huh.
and getting their feedback on it. And they liked it until, it turned tragic. And they also, he was like, well, they were upset because the parent was trying to show like that they changed their individual lives, like those students' lives were changed. But
Mhm.
the children's perspective was, no, we need to change the whole system. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the same idea. It's not little by little. They want to have massive change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I spent a year working in New York City
Mhm.
and I'm too old for that. But um, I understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
I don't get the concept fully, but it's our field is dominated by women, and a lot of women are tired of the
Yeah.
way it is now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I certainly do.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's very true. And that's something that I see, because, my background is in construction. That is something
Mhm.
that like, even though it is, very male dominated, in the construction side, the preservation part is not as male dominated. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so I think for some of us that still love what we do,
Hmm.
we have to think outside the box a little.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So is there anything that you would like to promote to our audience?
The company I work at,
Oh, sure.
I'm working at a construction company.
Okay.
I'm doing project management, and the thing it's called ASW Hobart,
Okay.
and I just love their approach.
Okay.
It's almost like they don't know the rules. And the president is like, well, no, we're going to use best practices.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard him say that, I was floored. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't heard that since graduate school.
Yeah.
And it guides him.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, we could patch that and,
Yeah.
make it functional, or we could use best practices and replace the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we're going to do it the right way. And if you don't have the money to do the right way, I'm sorry, but that's how we do it.
Right. Yeah.
And it like the first time I heard that argument, like something let go in my chest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. And so this company wants to grow
Mhm.
and it wants to see what it can do. And I'm here for it.
Okay, well, great. That's such a encouraging uh, statement to me, just because I've been seeing so many people on I think we're both in the Historic Preservation Professionals Facebook page complaining about wanting to leave construction companies.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that's very encouraging that you have found somebody that wants to do quality, because that's always what has driven us also. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad that you have found that.
Yeah. And I'm just
Yeah,
having a really good time. They're good
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I landed
It's
I landed
yeah.
in a good spot.
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah, it is so important. So
Absolutely.
how can our listeners contact you if they wanted to talk to you about, preservation, epoxy, the your
Um,
new company?
They could, my email is
Okay.
it's woodconservator at
Okay.
Gmail.
At Gmail. Okay. And I will make sure that that is on our page, on our Facebook, or not our Facebook, our website, for when some if somebody's listening, they're driving or whatever, they can go to and they'll be able to click through to you then.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm glad that we connected and we had this conversation. I feel like I learned some things.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.